impoverished. West of the Alps, bands of hunter-gatherers retreated to temperate areas. A new and innovative culture would eventually form from the ashes of the Gravettians. Spanning from roughly 22,000 to 17,000 years ago, the Solutreans emerged to herald a period of innovation and adaptation. Known for their exquisite stone tool craftsmanship, especially the iconic Solutrean point, these people mastered the art of stoneworking and survival during some of the coldest times in human history. In this documentary, we will delve into the archaeological findings that illuminate the Solutrean way of life. We will also be covering the controversial Solutrean hypothesis, which posits that this culture may have been the first to make it to the Americas. This topic will be discussed at the very end of the video. So without further ado, let's learn about these innovative survivors. The Solutrean culture was first identified at the Grotte du Chanier site at the Rock of Solutre in eastern France. The Rock of Solutre is a limestone escarpment dating to the Mesozoic period that looks over the nearby commune of Solutre-Pouilly. Excavation of the site started in 1866 and horse bones were quickly found. Later, archaeologist Henri Testel-Ferry discovered layers dating to the Upper Paleolithic that were full of animal bones, flint tools, and tombs. Ferry took great care of the remains in stratigraphic context. His work would help establish a chronology for the site. It was clear that the site represented a particularly well-preserved hunting camp from a unique culture not fully understood. Years later, after discoveries of similar advanced stone tools and symbolic elements, the site at the Rock of Solutre would come to be the name of this entire culture. Over a century later, we have learned a lot about the Solutrean culture and their incredible achievements. The Proto-Solutrean appeared as far back as 25,000 years ago, while the Solutrean proper lasted until around 17,000 years ago. They developed ingenious technology and increased their population during some of the coldest times in human history. To understand where this incredible culture came from, we must first talk about what happened to the preceding culture, the Gravettians. The end of the Gravettian culture was caused by the worsening of climatic conditions during the last glacial maximum. This was the coldest time during the last glacial period. As temperatures plummeted, glaciers expanded and vast swaths of territory became uninhabitable. From Britain even to southern Germany, we find no evidence of late Gravettian camps and hardly anyone even lived along the Danube. While the northern areas became gradually colder, southern areas such as the Iberian Peninsula or the Balkans witnessed alternating humidity rather than temperature oscillations. The once connected Gravettian Europe became fractured. Two major population centers emerged, one east of the Alps in southern France and Iberia, and one west of the Alps in Italy, the Balkans, and Eastern Europe. During the onset of the last glacial maximum, these populations became separated by around 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles, where almost no sites in between are reported. Starting around 26,000 years ago, the separation of these once relatively homogeneous people led to the development of distinct cultures on both sides of the Alps. The people to the east emerged to form the Epigravettian culture, a tradition which created smaller, simpler points than their Gravettian ancestors and who took less of a focus on symbolic elements. In the hostile conditions of the plains, they appear to have lived difficult lives that left little time for making crafts or developing their culture. In the more favorable conditions of southwestern Europe, the people of the region were able to develop the rich Solutrean culture. They were primarily known for their amazing stoneworking ability, but also for their other arts such as cave paintings and engravings. Before going into their culture, we should briefly talk about their genetics. Genomic sequencing of two Solutrean individuals, one from Loupiage in southwestern France and a younger one in La Riera in northern Spain, have revealed interesting things about these individuals. They both show relatedness with the earlier Gravettian Fornal cluster and the later Magdalenian Goyet Q2 cluster. The Fornal cluster originates during the Aurignacian, with the oldest individual dating to 35,000 years ago from Belgium. This cluster would go on to found the Western Gravettian populations. Solutrean populations are essentially the genetic descendants of the Western Gravettian populations. When considering any Upper Paleolithic European population, we must understand that their genetics differ greatly from modern Europeans. Modern Europeans descend from various migrations which occurred much later, such as the Neolithic farmers and the Indo-Europeans. Less than a third of the genetics of most modern European populations come from these Upper Paleolithic people, and this third is primarily made up of later Mesolithic populations which themselves differ greatly from the Solutrean people. The point is, though these people were European, they were much different than the modern inhabitants of the land.
And we're back in third quarter planning. Adams is quarterbacking this project, and she's looking pretty tired, Jill.
She's stuck, Bill, and that deadline is looming.
It looms for us all, Jill.
Wait a minute. She just pulled up Grammarly.
That is a smart move by Adams. Grammarly is an AI writing partner. Helps you make your point.
Look at that, Bill. She just asked Grammarly to help her write a summary of her doc, and she's shortening it. Beautifully done.
And she sounds like herself. Calm, convincing, and also like you'd trust her to look after your cat.
100%, Bill.
Oh no, flag on the play. I see messages coming her way.
And it's the CEO, Bill. Can Adams handle the pressure?
Is she? Yeah, she is! She's using Grammarly to stay on the...
The physical remains of the Solutrean people have unveiled interesting things about their physical appearance. Compared to their hardy Gravettian ancestors, they were slightly more gracile. Males were still quite tall, being up to 179 centimeters or around 5'11". Solutrean remains from Portugal display that Solutrean females had fairly gracile bodies compared to the relatively stocky women of the Gravettian. Examinations of the teeth of Solutrean individuals reveal that they were similar to the teeth of Gravettians and older Upper Paleolithic people, which are quite large compared to many modern Europeans. The facial shape of Solutrean people would have resembled Aurignacian or Gravettian populations to some extent. They would have had relatively robust faces with prominent brow ridges and strong jaws. They may have looked European, but their faces would have had a combination of features not seen in any modern European group. The skin color of Solutrean people would have been darker than modern European populations. This is because they still lacked the alleles for lighter pigmentation that appeared only around 19,000 years ago, though would not become common for a few thousand years. They certainly had lighter skin than the Aurignacians and likely lighter skin than the Gravettians, though little research has been done on the Solutreans in particular. They would have had darker skin than modern native Spanish or Portuguese people, and it likely varied from people living north of the Pyrenees and those on the coast of southern Iberia. Overall, the Solutreans likely resembled Western Gravettian people as well as subsequent Magellanian and some Mesolithic Europeans. The Proto-Solutrean culture first appeared around 26,000 years ago. This was well within the last glacial maximum, which started around the same time and would only end around 19,000 years ago. This was one of the coldest times since modern humans had been in Europe. Large glaciers covered much of northern Europe and covered many mountain ranges. The sea level was also much lower, opening up vast swaths of productive land. Despite the frigid temperatures, the middle latitudes of the Solutrean world, such as Cantabrian Spain and southern France, were home to a steppe tundra grassland that fed large herds of ungulates and other animals. Outside of this area, most of the Solutrean world was relatively treeless and hostile. Sites along the Mediterranean coast would have been relatively warm, though inland Iberia was hardly inhabited. The Solutrean world was much different than prior periods of the Upper Paleolithic. As mentioned earlier, they were separated from Eastern Gravettian populations by around 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles. They were restricted to the Iberian Peninsula and areas of southern France. Sites are known from northern France, though the frigid conditions made this area a frontier of Solutrean occupation. Solutrean archaeological sites essentially cover two rings, one surrounding the coast of the entire Iberian Peninsula and one circling the French Massif. The two rings were connected by narrow choke points to the glacial-covered Pyrenees Mountains. These so-called rings are not consistent and are rather made up of a variety of centers with desolate lands between them. Bands of Solutreans would have moved between these population centers during different seasons. The interior of Iberia appears to have been too hostile for human occupation, though a handful of sites can be found in south-central Spain. Though they lived during exceptionally cold times, through extensive exploitation of their local environments, they were able to increase their population from Gravettian times. To put their population size in perspective, the Aurignacian people only numbered around 1,500 individuals across Western and Central Europe, while the Gravettians numbered around 2,800. The Solutreans numbered between 750 and 3,600 people in the Franco-Cantabrian region. though I was unable to find a total population estimate for their entire range. We do know that the Solutreans were the only Upper Paleolithic population which actually saw growth during the last glacial maximum. This is likely due to the influx of immigrants coming from the northern regions which became uninhabitable. A total population of the Solutrean people would likely be less than around 5,000, considering that their world was much smaller than the vast territory occupied by the Orgnatians or Grevetians. Still, it is very impressive that they were able to grow their population during the conditions of the last glacial maximum. The period can thus be seen as a recovery from the apocalyptic conditions of the late Grevetian. I should also mention that we have lost many Solutrean coastal sites due to the rising sea levels at the end of the last glacial period. Vast areas of the Solutrean world now unfortunately lie under the sea. The colder conditions of the last glacial maximum were unsuitable for many animal species which were once widespread in Western Europe during Grevetian and Orgnatian times. Animals such as boar, red deer, and aurochs were forced to move into southern France and Iberia. Across the Solutrean world, horses and reindeer were quite abundant in Iberia and north of the Pyrenees Mountains. Other animals included ibex, megaloceros, woolly mammoth, woolly rhino, and predators like wolves, bear, and cave lion. Depending on the region, populations of these animals heavily varied and the Solutreans had to adapt their techniques and technologies to exploit them. The Upper Paleolithic is a time known for its innovative technology, and the Solutrean is no exception. The Solutreans developed their flint-knapping techniques far beyond any other culture of the time and created truly impressive tools. In order to understand their stoneworking technology, we must first understand the entire history of the development of stone tools. The first stone tools were simple stone cores with a sharp edge. Homo erectus refined these tools into Acheulean hand axes with much better edges. Middle Paleolithic humans, including the ancestors of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, created a technology known as Mousterian or Lavalwa, which used the flakes taken off of cores as tools. This allowed for the creation of ready-made tools with little effort. The next major innovation in stone technology was the creation of blade core technology in the Upper Paleolithic. We have talked extensively about these tools in this series so far, but to summarize, this technology consisted of taking long blades off of a core that could be turned into tools. These blades were often used as projectile points or attached to the sides of wooden or bone halves to form composite points. Large bone points without blades were also heavily used since the Orgnatian. The previously covered Grevetian culture used long blades on the sides of projectile points to take down various animals including mammoths. This technique would be carried on in the east with the Epigrevetian culture, but the Solutreans took a much different path. Instead of creating complicated composite projectiles which required the blades to be replaced when dull, the Solutreans began to focus on creating large bifacial points while continuing to produce small shouldered blade points. Though the question remains, why did they switch to creating large bifacial points? Bifacial points are much harder to make than replaceable ones. Researchers are not entirely sure why they moved away from composite projectiles. They may have been tied to the lack of wood or ivory during the last glacial maximum. What we do know is that these bifacial points would overtake the composite points for all the groups west of the Alps. Complex bifacial points were made long before the Solutreans in Africa and in early European cultures. Though the Solutreans would develop the technology further than any other had before them, complex Solutrean points did not just appear out of nowhere. We have been able to observe a clear development in point-making technique in the archaeological record. The first appearance of large points ancestral to Solutrean points are known as Valle Comprido points. They are fairly large flat points that were made from flakes and then worked on one side to make a more symmetrical and thinner point. These points are not very impressive, but they would eventually spread all over Spain and are clearly the predecessors to proper Solutrean points. It would take around 1,500 years of gradual improvement in stoneworking techniques to develop truly thin and symmetrical bifacial points. A bifacial point is simply a point that is worked on both sides. This allows the flint knapper to control the exact shape of the final point. Unifacial points can be fine, though they are typically quite unsymmetrical, which makes penetration less efficient, they break easier, and they are harder to have. Bifacial flint knapping, on the other hand, is much more difficult, but it creates a much better product. The development of bifacial points may have been a direct product of resharpening dull points. Valle Comprido points were created on unsymmetrical flakes and were slightly refined to become more symmetrical. A true Solutrean point, on the other hand, is heavily worked to create a much finer product. To understand how these points were made, I will be making one myself. Solutrean points were made with a number of techniques which developed during the Solutrean culture. First, we know that they used hard and soft hammers to rough out the point. A hard hammer is typically made of another stone and is used in the initial shaping of the core. This process is difficult and requires knowledge of how to set up platforms on a stone core in order to create a large flake. As a flint knapper, you must look at an edge and envision how you're going to set up a platform to remove a flake. Luckily, with the internet, I have been able to learn some of the basics of these techniques after a few years, though I am still very incompetent compared to Solutrean knappers. One technique that the Solutreans are known for would be overshot flaking. This technique can be difficult and also very risky. By hitting a platform with excessive power, the flake is taken off of the whole face to the other edge of the point. If done correctly, this can be used to drastically thin a point and also set up platforms on the other side of the point. This technique can accidentally be done on occasion, but the Solutreans harnessed its ability to thin to create some truly exceptional points. I was only able to get one overshot flake on this point, and it was barely an overshot flake, but it still counts. Another technique which the Solutreans used was pressure flaking. This consists of using a tool, most likely an antler or a bone, to push off a flake with pressure rather than percussion. This technique is used for pushing off long thinning flakes for specific areas and for putting the finishing edge on a point. And after the point is completed, it is also used to resharpen the point. Perhaps after watching a little bit of flint knapping, you can understand why it took the Solutreans around 1500 years to go from Valle Comprito points to the refined Solutrean points. The development of these techniques appear to have spread throughout Iberia and southern France during this time. The vast improvement of flint knapping techniques during the Solutrean appears to have been directly related to the population increase these regions experienced. In human history, more people often means more innovation. Though I have been speaking as if Solutrean points are one uniform design, they were actually very diverse. There are many different sizes and shapes of Solutrean points, often tied to local regions. The most well-known of which were the laurel leaf bifaces. These bifaces are often lanceolate, symmetrical, and thin. They appeared along with the Solutrean proper around 22,000 years ago. Their shape can vary, though they are generally elongated and leaf-shaped with a pointed base. Some were quite small at around 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches, though larger examples are as much as 25 centimeters or 10 inches in length. Variations of these large bifaces are found in various regions of Iberia. More rounded points, referred to as willow leaf points, differed from the typical shape. Other variations in shape are known and may reflect local cultural differences. These points are generally thought to have been used as knives or to have been mounted on large thrusting spears. Large bifaces are very useful for these roles. Stone knives must be resharpened by taking flakes off their edge, which reduces the overall size of the point. Larger bifaces can thus be resharpened many times before being exhausted. They were also useful as thrusting spears due to their pure size. A stab from a 25 centimeter or 10-inch leaf-shaped point would cause a fatal wound to almost any animal of the glacial period.
Pain means pause on the things you love, but green means go. Cool the pain with BioFreeze and keep on going. BioFreeze, green means go.
Laurel leaf points are exceptional, though a variation called Volgu points are even more astounding. The degree of skill and investment of resources used in Solutrean tool manufacture is apparent in the 15 laurel leaf points found in the Volgu cache. The points are between 25 to 35 centimeters or 10 to 14 inches in length, while also being extremely thin. Some points are less than 10 millimeters or 0.4 inches in thickness, while being 35 centimeters or 13 inches in length. This is an exceptional accomplishment in flint knapping technique. At the time, these bifaces were undoubtedly some of the finest ever made by our species, though eventually later cultures would go on to create some points on par with the Volgu cache. Interestingly, the points were far too large and thin to have been used as effective spears. They could have been used as knives, though only 2 of the 15 bifaces display any evidence of limited cutting. None of them display evidence of hafting, suggesting that they may have been held onto as symbolic objects. Master flint knapper Jacques Pellegrin determined that the points were created likely by one or maybe a few extraordinary flint artists. During my research into this topic, I just couldn't help but think of an aging flint knapping master surrounded by all of their tools at the finest flint quarry in France. Though it is easy to imagine this figure as a weathered old man, it is just as possible that a matriarch was the master. Male knappers have a tendency to try to muscle through problems within the rock, often leading to the destruction of the preform. I have admittedly done it many times. The reality is that we have no idea who made these works. Could it have been a young hotshot? Possibly, but modern master flint knappers have a very difficult time reproducing some of the finer Solutrean points. The finished points of the Volgu cache must have been highly prized. A vast amount of time and resources went into just gathering the materials necessary. The suspicion of researchers that these tools have a deeper symbolic meaning is supported by the way that they are deposited. They were placed pointing upward side by side in the ground. We can only speculate on the purpose of burying such prized items. Other Stone Age cultures around the world were known to cache tools for later use or for deeper purposes often connected to burial or ritual. These tools were never recovered, and it is unlikely that this group would simply forget the location of tools which required so much work to create. The Volgu cache is the pinnacle of the wider Solutrean knapping phenomenon of deciding to go above and beyond in the creation of stone tools. The expert skill put into their manufacture is as impressive as the stone they chose to work. They often chose extremely high-quality stone from faraway lands. Knappable stone varies heavily in its ability to be worked. Some stones are rough and hard to send flakes across. Other stones can be like glass, such as obsidian and high-quality flint. The Solutreans were highly aware of the quality of their knapping materials and often brought high-quality materials vast distances to create their tools. They even chose the flint knap quartz, which is often difficult, though beautiful. Low-quality knapping materials are much harder to work with, so the Solutreans found a way around this. They were one of the first cultures to heat-treat their knapping materials. Heat-treating stone in a fire makes it more brittle, but it also can become much easier to flint knap. The stone can become glossy and even change color. Flint can only get treated to around 300 degrees Celsius or 500 degrees Fahrenheit before it gets too brittle for tool use. Campfires often burn much hotter than this, posing a unique challenge for heat-treating stone. From analysis of 44 heat-treated laurel leaf points from France, it was found that the Solutreans were able to heat these tools precisely in this narrow window. The study concluded that the heat-treating technique must have been highly standardized and allowed for reproducible results. Heat-treating stone was developed in a variety of cultures worldwide and dates all the way back to 164,000 years ago in South Africa. This heat treating was done on coarse-grained silicrete, which can be heat-treated directly in an open fire. The Solutreans do appear to have been the first culture to heat-treat fine-grained materials such as chert to produce better flaking properties. This technique would eventually be lost in Europe before being rediscovered thousands of years later. Some points are easy to tell if they've been heat-treated, while others are difficult to identify due to natural variations in the color and texture of flint or chert. The bifaces found at the Volgu cache were so exceptional that researchers suspected that they may have been heat-treated. Though a 2018 study found that these points were likely not heat-treated even if their makers were aware of these techniques. Rather, they were made from a very high-quality raw flint from as much as 260 kilometers or 160 miles from the site. Heat-treating the points might have only posed unneeded risk for the material which they had already spent so much time collecting and transporting. Though it is easy to get caught up with their beautiful laurel leaf bifaces, they also used a large variety of other stone points and tools. The creation of fine blades continues into the Solutrean period. Unifacially or bifacially retouched blades were often used to create small projectile points. Some were simply left with their natural pointed edges, while others were made into well-made shouldered points. Some of these shouldered points are masterpieces in their own right. Pressure flaking a blade into a shape like this is no easy task. The final product is a deadly point which can be securely hafted with ease. Shouldered points and other smaller points were likely used on the tips of darts. The Solutrean is the first culture that we know for sure used the spear thrower or the atlatl. We know this from a bone hook that was found in France. It was found alongside many shouldered points, some of which were broken and discarded. Hooks are used in spear throwers to hold on to the projectile while it is being accelerated. To be clear, we are almost certain that Gravettian and even Aurignacian hunters used spear throwers based on the wear on their stone and bone points. But this is the earliest evidence of an actual spear thrower. Spear throwers can be made in many ways and often only require wood or rope, but the addition of a bone hook makes the spear thrower much more durable. The subsequent Magdalenian culture would go on to create many amazing spear throwers, but that is a topic for another day. Spear throwers are fantastic weapons that have been used from Australia to the Arctic. Many typically assume that the bow and arrow is undeniably superior, though modern researchers have found that this is not necessarily the case. Spear throwers allow a range of benefits that the bow and arrow does not. Much larger projectiles can be thrown with the spear thrower. The weapon system is also much easier to make, though darts take up more resources than an arrow. It is important to mention that these hooked or shouldered points are often found among large bifaces such as laurel leaf points. It is apparent that these stone tools represent specialized use. It is also important to mention that point styles, whether projectiles or larger bifaces, vary by region. Some researchers have even speculated that these styles represent cultural differences, while others believe it has more to do with point function. Some of the most unique points made by the Solutreans were tanged and winged points. They feature exceptional pressure flaking, such as well-made tangs and needle-nosed tips. They were undoubtedly made by master flint knappers. These points are only found in southern Iberia and may represent the use of the bow and arrow. As mentioned in the Aurignacian and Gravettian videos, bow technology may have been present in Europe very early on. It may have even been carried with some of the first modern humans in Europe around 54,000 years ago. Other evidence from the Gravettians suggests that some groups may have used this technology close in time to the Solutrean culture. The design of these points are very unique for the Upper Paleolithic, a design that would be rediscovered much later by Neolithic communities. A test on recreations of Solutrean barbed points found that they could be efficiently shot with a bow and arrow. The evidence supports the idea that some communities were hafting stone points to their arrows thousands of years before traditionally thought. The Solutreans used a variety of other stone tools such as scrapers, burins, and drills. Scrapers may have been hafted onto handles to more effectively scrape hides. Stone drills were often made from blade planks or flakes. These drills may have been hafted to devices to spin them much faster, such as bow drills or pump drills. This may have helped them drill into bone, and these tools may have also been used to create fire. Another tool which you are probably sick of hearing about by now on my channel are burins. Burins or birins are stone tools with a steep edge used to shape hard materials. They are very useful to shape bone, antler, and ivory. Though the Solutreans generally moved away from bone points, some are still found at their sites. Bone points can be made very long, allowing them for devastating penetration into game animals. They are also quite durable and reusable. Another tool that they may have made from bone or ivory are throwing sticks or boomerangs. A 23,000-year-old ivory boomerang was found all the way in Poland dating to the Gravettian period. Though we do not have direct evidence for this technology, it is very likely throwing sticks were being used, as our evidence goes back around 400,000 years. Other strange bone objects from the Solutrean are pointed at one end with grooves, and they appear to have been plugs used on water skins. When considering Upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, we often forget that staying hydrated was just as or even more important than staying fed. This may be some of the oldest evidence of portable water containers in the archaeological record. Perhaps the most important tool made of bone during the Solutrean was the eyed needle. The creation of clothing during the last glacial maximum was among the most important skills. Though the Solutreans of Iberia got to enjoy warmer conditions, winters still would have been frigid, and populations north of the Pyrenees certainly had to wear well-made clothing. Hides had to be harvested, scraped, tanned, and skillfully sewn into insulating clothing. This process would have been very laborious, considering every member of the tribe, including children, required clothing and regular repairs. Like other Paleolithic cultures, a variety of furs would have been used for different garments. Thick and insulating hides would have been used for parkas and leggings, while smaller garments would have taken advantage of the pliability of the hides of rabbits, foxes, and wolverines. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of direct evidence of clothing from the Solutrean, though it was undoubtedly an extremely important aspect of their lives.
I'm a sushi chef. I also happen to be a cat. How'd I get here? Adobe Photoshop. It turned a cute kitty like me into a sashimi master. And it can make your images look amazing too. In just a few clicks, you can replace a boring background, swap out a so-so sky, and remove distractions like people and power lines. With Photoshop, everyone can. I love playing with this mouse. Click or tap the banner to visit Photoshop.com and pounce on your free trial today.
Let's take a break from the video to talk about today's sponsor, Storyblocks, the ultimate stock media subscription service. A subscription to Storyblocks gets you access to unlimited downloads of diverse, high-quality media blocks for over quickly and efficiently. Like other Upper Paleolithic cultures, the Solutreans were great hunters and efficient gatherers. Their sites often contain large megafaunal species as well as smaller mammals and even aquatic resources. Evidence of their hunting prowess was discovered at their type site of Solutre. Based on the concentration of remains, it is estimated that between 30,000 to 100,000 horses were killed over a period of around 20,000 years. The vast accumulation of remains at the site has baffled researchers for over a century. How were people with hand-thrown spears able to routinely kill such a vast amount of horses? Researchers had once assumed that the hunters led the horses off of the rock at Solutre to fall to their death. After all, this has been observed with Native Americans and their famous bison jumps. This hypothesis was discarded due to the realization that none of the remains are found on the other side of the cliff. The bones are found on the southern side of the ridge. Here, there was a gradual slope. Subsequent research has found that the horses naturally crossed by the rock of Solutre during seasonal migrations. Realizing this, hunters likely drove the horses into a natural curve in the rock that would have hindered